Welcome to Module 1 of the Utah State Board of Education Paraeducator Module Series. The purpose of these modules is to present the Paraeducator standards and the general guidelines from the Utah Paraeducator Handbook. These modules have been developed through collaboration amongst the Teaching and Learning, Special Education, and Student Advocacy Services departments at the Utah State Board of Education. This module series is designed to support paraeducators and the educators and administrators who work with and supervise them. The modules can be completed independently. However, it is recommended to watch them as an educational team, which would include the paraeducator, school administrator, and supervising educator. Local education agencies, meaning school districts or charter schools, may use the term paraeducator as an all-encompassing term for various job titles, including, but not limited to, teaching assistant, aide, paraprofessional, and instructor. There are 6 paraeducator modules in the series. Module 1, Introduction to Being a Paraeducator, will focus on the roles and responsibilities of the paraeducator and their supervising educator and the importance of confidentiality. Module 2, Instructional Strategies, gives examples of strategies and techniques paraeducators and teachers use to deliver instruction and the unique instructional setting a paraeducator may work in. This module also explains the paraeducator's role in data collection. Module 3, Professionalism and Ethics, discusses being part of an instructional team and working with culturally diverse students. Module 4, Positive Learning Environments, focuses on behavior management plans, proactive management strategies, and teaching social skills to students. Module 5, Effective Communication and Participation in the Team Process, discusses problem solving, resolving conflicts and concerns, and fostering positive relationships. Module 6, Foundations of Special Education, will give an overarching explanation of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, an Individual Education Program, IEPs, and behavior plans. It is recommended to review the modules in order as a team, but is not required. To ensure you receive the most beneficial experience, we ask that before watching each module, you please review the suggested reading from the Utah Paraeducator Handbook and complete the groundwork guide that you may either print or download and save. At the conclusion of each module, you will need to complete a quiz with 100% accuracy. You can print a certification with your score to keep for your own personal records. Before watching Module 1, participants will need to print or download the groundwork guide and answer the questions on the guide. These questions directly relate to content that will be presented in the module and are intended to activate background knowledge. These questions in the groundwork guide will be addressed throughout the module. Participants will also need to read the introduction in the Utah Paraeducator Handbook, which can be found on pages 3 and 4, as well as the confidentiality section on page 9. There are 2 objectives for Module 1. The first objective is participants will be able to define the roles and responsibilities of the paraeducator and their supervising educator. The second objective is participants will be able to define confidentiality and discuss the implications of confidentiality in an educational setting. Before diving into these objectives and content, the Utah Standards for Instructional Paraeducators, which are the basis for these module series, need to be reviewed. The Utah Standards for Instructional Paraeducators were created and approved by the Utah State Board of Education. These standards are performance expectations for paraeducators. Standard 1 provides opportunities for paraeducators to support instruction. Standard 2 explains how paraeducators should demonstrate professional and ethical practices. Standard 3 shares how a paraeducator can support a positive learning environment. Standard 4 talks about how a paraeducator should communicate effectively and participate in the team process. Each of the 4 standards are divided into separate sections. The first section outlines core competencies, which are the skills and knowledge required for an effective performance as an instructional paraeducator. There are anywhere from 4 to 7 competencies for each standard, and they are based on the Every Student Succeeds Act and state-approved special education standards. The second section addresses additional knowledge and skills needed to be an effective paraeducator. Some of these competencies may only be required for specific roles. For example, a paraeducator working with a student on reading would not need to know how to assist in providing medical care or teaching self-care needs. The Utah Standards for Instructional Paraeducators have the core competencies listed directly under the individual standards. Under the core competencies are the skills the paraeducator must have to complete the competency. The section in green are the supporting competencies. For paraeducators to be successful in achieving the core competencies, they must have an understanding of their role and the responsibility of their supervising educator. Paraeducators and their supervisors work together to support students in accessing the Utah Core Standards, Alternate Achievement Standards, and the Early Childhood Standards. Although paraeducators and their supervisors work together as an educational team, their respective roles and responsibility are very different. Paraeducators will always work under the direct supervision of a licensed educator. This could include, but is not limited to, a regular general education teacher, a psychologist, a social worker, an occupational therapist, a speech-language pathologist, or a physical therapist. Paraeducators can be assigned to work with students in any grade level, from preschool to post-high. Post-high students are students receiving special education services and are older than traditional high school students, ages 18 through 22. Paraeducators could also work in a variety of settings. They might support students in a regular general education classroom, in a special education classroom, or in non-instructional settings such as the lunchroom, recess, and hallways. Paraeducators may work in one or more capacity as part of their specific job duties. They may provide assistance or tutoring to an individual student or a small group of students under the direction of the licensed educator. Paraeducators may assist in keeping the classroom running smoothly by helping with organization of materials and activities. They also support classroom management by keeping the schedule consistent and reinforcing the rules and procedures as outlined by the classroom teacher. Providing assistance in computer laboratories may be another expectation of paraeducators. In this situation, the paraeducator would support students in following computer lab expectations as well as assist students when they require feedback or guidance when working with technology. Paraeducators may be asked to be involved in some parent engagement and involvement activities, such as facilitating parent tutoring, classroom parties or presentations, community nights, and cultural events. Paraeducators may also accompany a teacher on home visits. Providing assistance in libraries could also be an expectation of a paraeducator. This could include supporting students in following library rules and procedures, accessing media materials, and assisting with activities. Paraeducators are often expected to provide behavior supports for students. The supervising educator will outline student behavior expectations for classroom activities and non-instructional activities, which the paraeducator will reinforce. These behavior supports may be general rules for all students or more specific expectations for individual students. Paraeducators might also be responsible for providing supervision for students in non-instructional settings, such as ensuring students stay safe on playgrounds during recess, sit at their assigned table during lunch, and walk quietly in the hallway. Each paraeducator's job is unique. Supervisors and school administrators will provide their paraeducator with a detailed job description. Each supervisor and LEA administrator will need to define their specific job duties for each of their paraeducators. Some example could be a paraeducator working in a special education setting may be asked to help deliver specially designed instruction to an individual student, while a paraeducator working as a job coach may be working with students on specific tasks to increase their employment skills. LEA administrators and supervisors must remember to give job descriptions to non-instructional paraeducators as well. Time to review the groundwork guide. Question 1 on the groundwork guide asks to give an example and a non-example of the role of a paraeducator. Take a minute to discuss with your team your answer. Did your assumption of the role of a paraeducator change? Did anything surprise you? How might your understanding of the role of a paraeducator help you support students? The role of a paraeducator, instructional and non-instructional, is instrumental in the success of students. However, a paraeducator can not do their job without a supervising educator by their side. It is the role of a supervising educator to prepare the lesson plan and the instructional support activities based on the Utah Core Standards, Alternate Achievement Standards, or the Early Childhood Standards. The paraeducator's role is to implement the lesson plan and the support activities. It is the responsibility of the supervisor to evaluate the achievement and growth of those students with whom the paraeducator is assigned to work. It is not the responsibility of the paraeducator to design or implement lesson plans without guidance from the supervising educator. The paraeducator works under the license of the supervising educator. While working with the paraeducator, the supervisor's role includes, but is not limited to, providing a detailed job description to help clarify the roles and responsibilities of the supervisor and the paraeducator. The supervisor will evaluate the performance of the paraeducator and provide training or inform the paraeducator of training opportunities, which could help increase the productivity and development of the paraeducator. The supervisor will provide ongoing supervision and direction to the paraeducator. Supervisors should provide constructive and timely feedback in areas of strength and in areas needing improvement. Groundwork Guide Question 2 is a real-world scenario. A very busy English teacher would like the paraeducator to create and deliver a vocabulary lesson. How should the paraeducator respond? This scenario is difficult because the paraeducator does not want to be insubordinate by not doing what the supervising teacher is asking, but the teacher is asking the paraeducator to do something unethical. How did you respond? Would you change your answer now after understanding how the role of the paraeducator is different from the supervising teacher? As we discussed in the previous slides, paraeducators have many job duties and responsibilities that directly involve working with students. An important requirement in working with students is maintaining confidentiality. Confidentiality about the student and their academic and behavioral performance. Confidentiality is defined as the state of keeping or being kept secret or private. Standard 2 of the Utah Standards for Instructional Paraeducator lists respect confidentiality as a core competency that paraeducators must practice to demonstrate professionalism and ethical practices. Discretion is an important aspect of respecting the confidentiality of students. Paraeducators must understand what student information can be shared. For example, it may be appropriate to share with another teacher that a student's favorite color is blue, but it would not be appropriate to share with the same teacher that a student was sent to the principal's office for breaking the classroom rules. Respecting confidentiality of students should always be practiced by all educators working with all students. Licensed educators will also practice discretion regarding what student information is relevant and necessary and should be shared with paraeducators. Confidentiality is essential to working in schools. Groundwork Guide Question 3 asks how you would define confidentiality. Talk with your team about your definition. Can you think of a real-world scenario where confidentiality is crucial? Just as an adult would not want their doctor to share their private medical information with a neighbor, students and their families have the same right to confidentiality. Along with confidentiality, the Utah State Board of Education adheres to the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. The Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, is a federal law that protects the privacy of student educational records. Personally identifiable information, or PII, is confidential. This includes students' names, parents' names, addresses, social security numbers, personal characteristics, and other information that makes the student easily identifiable. Report cards, transcripts, and discipline records should not be shared. Information regarding who is in special education, medical needs, or specific services a student receives is to be kept confidential as well. School records may only be released with parental consent. Written consent must first be obtained before a student's special education record is released. Schools must notify parents before any disclosure of student information. If you would like more information on FERPA, please visit the website here on the USBE YouTube channel. Please always use professionalism and discretion in conversations about students, even if you are conversing with other teachers, faculty, or staff members. Be extra cautious in common areas such as hallways and the faculty room. It is important to not discuss a specific student. The use of code names is not a safe way to communicate about students, as others often easily figure them out. Conversing about students while you are out with your friends is not a safe place to talk about students either. You never know who is listening to your conversation. Groundwork Guide Question 4 is another real-world scenario. Parents often ask paraeducators for information about their child or another child in the class. In this scenario, Bree's father asked the paraeducator if she thinks a child in the class has ADHD. What should the paraeducator do? How could the paraeducator respond respectfully without breaking confidentiality or FERPA? In Groundwork Guide Question 5, Juan's mom wants to send all the kids in his class an electronic invitation or evite to his birthday party. She asked the paraeducator for a list of all the parents' email addresses. How should the paraeducator respond? How does your understanding of confidentiality and FERPA shape your answer? In this first module, we defined our audience of paraeducators and the educators and administrators who work with and supervise them. We went over the expectations to review the readings and complete the groundwork guide prior to watching each module. We also set the expectation that a quiz will need to be completed with a score of 100% accuracy after each module. The module stated our objectives, as participants will be able to define the roles and responsibilities of the paraeducator and their supervising educator, as well as participants will be able to define confidentiality and discuss the implications of confidentiality in an educational setting. We learned about the Utah standards for instructional paraeducators. We discussed how the Utah State Board of Education created and approved these standards, which are performance expectations for paraeducators. We discussed the role of paraeducators and their supervisors. We learned that although paraeducators and supervisors work together as an instructional team, their roles are very different. The modules taught about FERPA and confidentiality. We learned the importance of using discretion when discussing students, even when discussing students with other teacher, faculty, and staff. We discuss what personally identifiable information is and when and how those records can be obtained. This concludes Module 1 of the Utah Paraeducator Training Series. As mentioned earlier in the module, participants are expected to now complete the quiz for Module 1. To receive a certificate of completion, a score of 100% must be achieved. It is recommended that the certificate is printed for personal or LEA records.